Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, thank you so very much for being a listener to the Public Relations Review podcast. I would really appreciate your leaving a review of the podcast. Let me know what you think. To make it easy, you can go directly to the podcast website, and that is publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can go directly to the review page to leave your review. So let me know what you think of the podcast. And again, thank you so very, very much for being a listener.
Welcome to the multiple award-winning Public Relations Review podcast, ranked by Apple among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide. Each episode features distinguished American and international guests who explore a wide range of public relations topics, including AI, digital trends, crisis communications, storytelling, media relations, and more. Our conversations bring together seasoned professionals, business leaders, authors, academics, and government officials and others to share their insights and expertise. Now, here is your host and producer, Peter Woolfolk.
Hello again, and thank you for listening to the Worldwide Public Relations Review podcast. Now, a question to my listeners. Are your organizations prepared for the growing tension between AI adoption and your ESG sustainability goals? Do you worry that the push for AI-driven efficiency could unintentionally undermine corporate social responsibility efforts and ESG commitments? Or is there a path where AI and sustainability can truly coexist? Well, my guests today are here to help us get a firm grasp on this rather perplexing matter. Representing Temple University are colleagues Dr. Heather Lamaris and Greg Weissman. Let me welcome both of you to the podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
Great to be here today.
Well, look, let's begin by explaining what the actual tension and difficulty is between when simultaneously using AI platforms and trying to implement social corporate responsibility and ESG. What's the problem there?
Well, it's multi-layered. Start with that. First of all, I think we have to step back a second and define what we mean by ESG, because the issue with using that term like DEI is there's no universally accepted definition of what those terms mean. But in the context of AI, there's certainly the environmental cost that is well known, but there's social costs and sustainability costs that I don't think are as widely discussed in terms of how it affects the employee base. There's been a lot of senior management rhetoric about using AI for efficiency. And those messages are directed at the investment community. It's Wall Street speak. The problem is employees hear that and they think, oh my God, I'm going to be replaced by a computer algorithm. Mm-hmm. So there's a disconnect in terms of understanding what these terms mean. And again, I'm not saying organizations shouldn't be efficient and strive for efficiency, but if you're talking about, the cost to people and your workforce, and we've seen some companies backtrack and alter their rhetoric now that, no, they want AI to be a partner with humans. But, you do have people like Goldman Sachs CEO in the UK a couple of weeks ago who talked publicly about lower valued human capacity and replacing that with AI, which he then, of course, had to walk back. Mm-hmm. So from a communications point of view, it's who are you talking to? And understand you may be talking to one audience, like a Wall Street audience, but it's going to go viral in 2 seconds, and you're going to expose that message to audiences that you didn't intend to. Well, they're going to have something to say about it. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there and let Heather chime in.
I would take a more sort of simplified approach to it than Greg did and say, if we think about ESG, we're talking about environment, social, governance, the three legs of the stool. If you just take them one by one, when you talk about this tension between AI and increased efficiency versus ESG goals, for example, well, on the one hand, say you want to increase efficiency with AI, but in order to implement AI is one of the worst technological inventions in terms of hurting Mother Nature, right? So the amount of water, the amount of energy on the grid, the amount of silver and nickel and precious resources that are used even to building the components that go into the computers. So right there's a tension off the bat. Like you say you're an ESG-friendly company, but then you're using a technology that is extremely harmful to climate. Mm-hmm. And then if you take the social, and I think that's where Greg really, really honed in on. If you take the social piece of it, you're saying, oh, we're an organization that puts people first. But now you're not putting people first, because now you're talking about implementing efficiencies and chatbots and AIs and LLMs that actually eliminate tasks. And as Greg just referenced, the Goldman Sachs report that demonstrates that there's an inordinate number of those kind of simplified or managerial or basic accounting, those kinds of tasks that are currently held by women. So you're disproportionately hurting women's jobs. And that's a problem. And then if you just go to the G, which is governance, which we don't talk enough about, now we get into the profit versus purpose. And you're saying, oh, we're an ESG, we're a people first, we're a purpose-driven company. All of our corporate culture is purpose-driven, except you're implementing technology that's about profit first.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that if you just take it through like that, very simply, AI tends to be at odds with all of the climate pledges, with all the corporate culture pledges, and with all the fair governance pledges that organizations, small and large, from Main Street to Wall Street, have been making for the last 20 years.
Well, it does sound like a massive problem here. So how have people come to grips with it? What are corporations doing when they are presented with this kind of information that, AI is going to help you this way, but it's going to maybe damage, some of your staff in another? How are they coming to grips with that?
Yeah, that's a great question. To a degree, I'm not sure they have yet. I don't think that a lot of them haven't figured it out yet. They're either talking about efficiency or they're talking about we're a people-first company. Well, how do you reconcile those two with adding AI into the workforce? And I don't want to create an impression that AI is the boogeyman. It's, the latest innovative technology, but if you look at the history of humanity, there's always been disruptive technology going back to the printing press. And disruptive technology, by its very nature, eliminates some levels of employment and creates new ones that nobody ever thought of before. So, it holds to the pattern of technological innovation. However, this is a leap we haven't seen before, where I personally think the promise of AI and the threats of AI are both overblown, and the truth right now is somewhere in the middle. But I think too many organizations are getting caught up in the hype. And one interesting thing I've observed is they went all in on AI, and all of a sudden, and they're spending, Peter, they're spending billions of dollars every year. And now boards are starting to say, well, wait a minute, what's our ROI on this?
Mm-hmm.
And senior management can't really answer that yet. You can claim greater efficiency, but where's the data? So we're starting to see businesses, I won't say jump off the bandwagon, but maybe pull the reins a little bit and say, well, we're spending all this money, and what are we getting out of it? And nobody's really been able to answer that yet.
Well, as I sit here listening to it, because obviously that was not something that was on my radar screen, but as I'm listening to you now talk about, yes, people are, crazy and going out of their way to adopt AI to do ABC in the companies, but obviously they have not recognized the issues that are being brought up, as you said, with the CSR and the ESG commitments as well. So how are they coming to grips, or who is helping them to come to grips with the fact that AI is here, but it's and perhaps helping you do what you want to do, but it's the impact on some of your other issues and programs is being impacted in a negative way? How is this coming to their attention? Is it coming to their attention? And has anybody started to make any efforts to come to grips with it?
Well, I think, as Greg pointed out, I think the reality is that what's happened is the AI models and the AI efficiency have come out of, think about it, left hand, right hand, not talking to each other, where the AI is coming out of tech. It's the chief technology officer. It is the business growth officer. And it is over sort of in the profit center, not the purpose center of an organization, where you have the people who are developing corporate culture and corporate values in completely different departments. So ultimately, the reconciliation is the CEO's responsibility and the board of directors' responsibility for large organizations. But if you're talking about a small family-owned operation or a mid-sized business, then, that's going to be whoever the managing partners and the owners are to sit down. I think the problem, the disconnect is it's sort of this unintentional consequence, right, of always chasing efficiency without thinking about the long-term consequences of what that efficiency might do.
Mm-hmm.
To answer your question about like who's talking about it, well, Greg and I just wrote a book about it, Raising Social Capital. But beyond that, you know, we are more and more being asked to do podcasts like this or to go around and give talks. And as we're doing that, what we're finding is the answer is just not a lot of people. Because everybody, for all the talk about integration and all of the ways that, you know, organizations want to move into modern spaces of flat governance, they still are very siloed. And the larger the organization, the more siloed. So I actually think smaller businesses are better at addressing this because the larger organizations are so siloed that they're really not thinking it through. And so it's a problem that has emerged, and we're calling attention to it, you're calling attention to it, but we need more people to sound the alarm so that the executive leadership teams and the managing partners and the family-owned businesses will actually sit around the table and figure it out.
You know, what grabbed my attention there when you talked about parts of an organization being siloed. I recall when I was in the Clinton administration, I was actually the U.S. Department of Education. And one of the things we discovered, you know, down there was that you have sections of the same group, if you will, that are next to each other being siloed, and they're not exchanging ideas about what it is that they're doing. And in some cases, they're repeating the same work. So it took, you know, myself and several other people to say, hey, wait a minute, we got to get together. We're going to come together. Everybody's coming to the table to take a look at this thing because we're and in some cases, we're being very inefficient because we're duplicating services. But in this case, you know, you've got things that are maybe opposing each other, maybe in some fashion, when they perhaps in some way can work together if we'd sit down and talk about this thing and explore ways of working efficiently and doing both if possible.
Yeah, I think it calls for a new model, Peter. The traditional capitalistic model of profit, and don't misunderstand, I'm not against profit, but so many businesses are driven by the profit motive.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. That's why you're in business, to make a profit. But, and again, this is nothing new, but the human cost kind of gets second billing, and you hope, in answer to your earlier question, you would hope the communications people are acting in a traditional role of being the conscious of their organizations or bringing this to senior management's attention. The good news is we're starting to see CCOs at those tables. You know, there was a recent report, I'd have to go back and find it, but, you know, CCOs are increasingly reporting directly to the CEO and having more influence. So it's a matter of balancing risk and influence. But to your point, senior leaders are trained in business schools.
Right.
And they're not trained to come up through the communication side. So their motive is financial, which is fine. But they're not trained in stepping back to say, well, wait a minute, what does this mean for our workforce? What does this mean for our long-term business model? You know, and a lot of this hype, of course, is being pushed by the AI labs. They're in business to make money too. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of leadership is getting caught up in the hype without stepping back and saying, well, wait a minute, what is the long-term impact of all this stuff? Because AI is evolving so fast that the AI you use this year is going to need to replace in 6 months.
Right.
And, you know, where's that money coming from? Mm-hmm. And has a trickle-down effect to societal impacts. Well, if AI starts replacing human beings, okay, that means less taxes are being paid into the system, which means there's less money for the government to do things. It's great to, in the utopian view, well, the AI will free up people to do other creative things. Okay, great. And who's paying the taxes into all that stuff? Mm-hmm. You know, so this has a lot of ripple effects that I don't think are being widely discussed at all. A lot of it's being driven by Wall Street, frankly.
Well, that was probably my next question. I was going to be asking if you guys have thought about actually going to Wall Street and talking to some of the heavy hitters up there about this conundrum, if you will.
Yeah, we've talked to family offices, we've talked to private equity, we've talked to investment bankers. When we were interviewing people for our book, trying to understand, and one of the interesting things sort of that we were able to uncover in the world of ESG is that a lot of this, I don't want to use the term made up, but a lot of this is sort of self-governance. Let's say that. A lot of it's self-governance. So when we ask real serious questions like, well, how are you accounting for the environmental impact? How are you determining what your ESG scores are in your investment portfolio based on what companies are doing? A lot of those answers are, self-governed, like they've created their own sort of system for this. So outside of proper government regulation, and as you know, ESG is very contentious in the U.S. for regulation, and AI regulation is very contentious. So sort of in this gray, foggy area, there's not a lot of clarity. And without clarity, it gives room for organizations to, for instance, count all of the pluses they're doing to get carbon credits or to have a carbon neutral supply chain or manufacturing plant, but without counting all the deficits or the negatives of the AI that they're using, because that's a different company. That's the AI company causing that problem, not them. They're just licensing the product. And so this is a larger ecosystem. If you take any one organization and they're just they're just kind of doing it in an accounting practice style of good and bad, they get to claim all the good on the climate and social governance pieces without having to own any of the bad on the AI piece outside of the human cost. This is problematic, but this is also something that people in policy spaces are arguing about, people in Wall Street are arguing about, and because the ecosystem, and as Greg said, the ripple effects are so large, it's going to take years, if not decades, to come to some kind of level of clarity. I don't foresee clarity in this space happening in the next decade, which means self-governance, authenticity, legitimacy is going to be owned by the people who are the most transparent and about what they're doing, the organizations that are the most forthcoming and transparent and willing to have these discussions will win the trust of the people, because it's not going to come top down anytime soon.
It's basically analogous, Peter, to industries regulating themselves, and we know what happens when industries do self-regulation.
Oh yeah.
So the analogy is very much the same, and I absolutely agree with Heather. It's not going to be addressed anytime soon. The problem is, because it won't be addressed anytime soon and the technology is advancing so far, we're reaching a reflection point, which we're going to hit before we start having these broad conversations. And by that time, it may be too late.
Well,
it reminds me of, we're going to have a situation. I'm not that I can predict the future, but, I think we're all old enough to remember when the EPA was doing all the toxic cleanup work in the 70s and the 80s from all the unregulated or self-regulated manufacturing in America pre-EPA days. I think we're looking at that. We're looking at a situation where we're going to hit the tipping point. We've already hit the tipping point, actually. And there's going to be mass adoption, and then there's going to be unintended consequences. And we're going to once again be playing defense and cleanup and be in crisis mode, as opposed to being forward thinking and taking our time. And part of the reason they won't take their time, can't take their time on the AI side, is because this is sort of a global quest for AI domination now. So it's well beyond Main Street America. And we've sort of lost agency in this battle to the major multinationals and to defense contractors and all of the larger and the governmental entities that all see this as a global battle for who owns, who is the global dominant country for AI. And so it's really beyond us in a lot of ways. So we have to control what we can control, especially if we're small businesses. And we have to be transparent and honest and forthcoming and thoughtful.
Yeah, and to Heather's point, this is not just a domestic issue. I mean, the EU has pulled back on their AI regulations. So this goes beyond U.S. borders. This, as Heather said, this is a global issue. And you've got, if you believe the headlines, you've got the two major competitors, which is us and China, and in any competition, there's only one winner eventually. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure I want to be around when it's all done. So,
well, one of the things I do notice, and obviously when these AI companies come up with something new, there's a huge explosion of information and rush to the stock market to buy some stocks. NVIDIA, I think, set some sort of a record based on when they went public, how many people
Yep.
bought the stock, and it's
Well, and
continuing to
yeah,
go on. Mm-hmm.
right. Well, Anthropic's going to go public. Elon Musk, his AI is going to go public. And you're right. These valuations are just, astronomical. Just speaking personally, I would never invest in an AI lab. I might invest in somebody who's in the infrastructure of AI labs,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't put my own money in an AI lab. And maybe, 5 years from now, I'll come to regret that statement financially. But, it's just, again, I was just reading, I was telling somebody earlier, I was just reading an article over the weekend about some AI lab is experimenting with AI in medicine to the point where the vision is to replace human doctors with AI.
Mm-hmm.
Personally, I'm not real comfortable with that.
I'm sure a lot of other people aren't going to be very comfortable either.
And I don't think a lot of people would be very comfortable with taking the human out of the loop, because what their tests so far have shown that medical diagnoses using AI are three quarters of the time wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Again, AI has some wonderful uses, but talking to a human doctor and talking to an algorithm are totally different things.
Just another quick curiosity. I just wonder if the two of you had thought about maybe doing an op-ed piece in the Wall Street Journal on this.
Something we've talked about, not recently, but we have talked about it.
Yeah, we've talked about it, or maybe doing something for Harvard Business Review, but we haven't submitted it yet. But that's a really good. If you vote for us to do that, maybe we should rethink that.
Yeah, maybe it's time to revisit
maybe it's
that.
time to revisit it.
Well,
I think if I were going back to a question you brought up earlier, Peter, if I was counseling small to mid-sized agencies or small to mid-sized businesses that were asking about should we use AI, I would say two things to consider. And I would say, yes, you can implement it cheaper, and Greg kind of alluded to this earlier, but this is going to remind me of streaming or the promise of cable. I don't know. Do you guys remember when cable was $8?
Right.
And HBO came out and cable came out, and they said, oh, this is going to be the greatest invention ever in television, and you're going to be able to watch all these channels that are not public, and you have all this stuff for $8. Well, I don't know about you, but it's not $8 anymore in my budget.
Right.
And then they did the same thing when they did streaming. Streaming is a great alternative to television because you don't have to have ads. You pay a fee, and it's ad-free. But now it's broken. Everybody has their own streaming service. And so if you want to watch, you have to subscribe to like 6 different services to watch all your favorite shows that you used to just be able to turn on the TV and watch. And then also on top of that, you have ads, and even if you're paying. So what we have seen in the past in media spaces is the promise, it's almost like a loss leader. They draw you in, they bring you in on some kind of like a cheap plan. This idea that I can belong to Claude or ChatGPT or something and use their tools to run a PR agency, for example, on a hope and a prayer and a string budget, that works at first. But if you want to grow and scale, and then you're going to need human ingenuity and creativity, and you're going to need to really think through what happens when you become over-reliant on technology, and then you can't afford the new subscription price. That's one thing I would tell people to think about. The other thing I would tell people to think about is there's a huge boomerang effect culturally with young people in the digital world. We're noticing Gen Z is in droves. They're getting off dating apps. They're getting off of video games. They're craving deeply human connection because they've been raised without it. And there is a prediction that people want to deal with people. They're tired of calling and pressing one and waiting on hold and chatting with chat box and customer service. And so I think the agency or the small business that learns how to implement AI in a way that truly does increase efficiency but does not replace humanity is going to be the winner. And that's what I mean when I say control what you can control. But don't get so caught up in it, like Greg is saying, that you run with it and you build this big agency or this Main Street business that's totally dependent on technology where the subscription triples and quadruples and you can't even keep up with the cost. or where people feel completely disconnected from your business because there's no human element to your business anymore.
Or your technology gets hacked or hijacked. I sometimes get teased by younger counterparts because I like to pay in cash. And when they laugh at me, I say, yeah, but you can't hack cash.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're all old enough to remember when PCs came into the workspace, into the work environment. And I can remember the early promise, this is going to, we're going to cut down on paper use. Well, now, we use paper more than ever.
All right.
Because you print everything. You print emails. You print, it's because nobody wants to read, and your human eye doesn't like large blocks of copy on a screen. So people print stuff out. So, no, it didn't live up to the promise at all. In fact, the opposite was, it's both fascinating to watch and also a little scary, but I don't think anybody has an answer yet.
Well, one of the things that came to my mind as I listened to you, because I think maybe when I talked to you, Greg, and several other college professors, one of the biggest complaints that they have about students is that they can't stand up and speak on to folks that are so busy with their computers or phones, being able to communicate with people. But they also want to find out when they go to a company, what social things are you doing to help the community or the environment? Those are some of the things that they care about. So if, yes, I can handle the stuff that you want me to do in terms of, computers and AI, but what are you doing socially to help the world or the community and so forth? Right. That seems to be could be a complexity somewhere in this discussion.
Yeah, well, I can only speak for the students I teach. They're not on the phones in my classes.
Oh, okay.
I don't let them. But I also will say that my observation is that these last few years or so, 10 years of college students, they are engaged in the community. Again, I can't speak for all college students, but the ones I interact with, they are engaged in the community. They want to be engaged in the communities. They want to, they've been told their whole lives, you can be the one to make a difference. Okay, they've bought into that. Mm-hmm. And they're actively engaged in trying to make a difference in their communities, however that's defined. I think there's this fallacy that, the digital generation, they're fluent in AI and everything. Well, the fact is, no, they're not. I don't have to teach them how to prompt. They know that. They could teach me. Mm-hmm. I need to teach them how to think and decide if the prompt is the right thing to do, or if you're going to use a prompt, what are you asking? Mm-hmm. And help them refine the question. And it's certainly in education, there's certain things AI is great at. I've used it. I've been following AI before ChatGPT became a thing. Mm-hmm. So I've been observing this for a long time. Because again, it's nothing new. It's been around a long time. It just came into the public consciousness, 4 or 5 years ago. But one interesting exercise I do, Peter, is I have an assignment for my undergrads where they are required to use AI within certain parameters for an assignment, and then they have to do a reflection piece on how they felt about it. And overwhelmingly, they all like it. Mm-hmm. It takes too much time. It's not original. I have to go, I could have done this quicker and better myself. And my point of view is good. I'm glad. That's exactly what I want to hear.
Well, what that says to me is that sometimes people have to experience things to fully understand how they work or how they don't work.
No question. I think that's human nature.
Right. Yep. So, I'm not surprised to hear that sort of thing because, when it's being described to you, people only talk about the good side of it. But if you dig a little deeper, there's something that maybe you did not know. And once you hear it, you don't want to go any further.
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand and really reflect on, for our generation and the one above us who are pretty much still running a lot of these organizations, to reflect on the sociocultural sort of consequences of what we've done. We spent 25 years raising this current generation that's coming into the workforce, millennials to some degree and Gen Z for sure. We spent 25 years basically scaring them about the end of the world. From a climate perspective, there's been political argument and, after political argument and the UN SDG goals and everything where they came to, and we told them, not us three, but as a society, the elders in society told the younger generation, solve this problem, solve this problem, solve this problem. And then they all became basically warriors for climate. So yes, they want the world to be a better place. We said, be social change agents, go do this. We also said, go get a degree and do all these things. This young group of people feels betrayed and tricked because they did everything we asked collectively in our older generations of them. They went to school, they got good grades, they learned about the climate, they go pick up trash, they recycle, they don't use plastic straws, they do all of the things. And then this thing called AI comes in and is like, oh, it can do it faster, smarter, quicker, for cheaper. But by the way, it uses 3 times the amount of electricity and water, and we have to tear up Mother Earth for the rare minerals to make it run. But don't worry. And it's going to take your job. So the sociocultural effect of what we've done to a generation, there's going to be generational trauma from this. So it's really not it's a much deeper, the sociologists are going to be looking at this for the next 50 years. It's a much deeper question of corporate values, of whether it's a family-owned business, a Main Street business, or a Wall Street business, of what are we doing here, folks? Do we care about the climate? Or was that really not, did we only care about the climate until we found the next big invention that's going to make people a lot of money? And do we care about sort of this existential crisis we've created in young people? Or are we just going to call them, fragile snowflakes and tell them to get over it and move on? And so, I don't mean to be super vigilant or anti-organization, because I myself am a business owner, but I'm also a parent of 2 Gen Z kids. And I'm also a professor who's listened to hundreds, if not thousands. Between Greg and I, we've had thousands of students in the last 25, 30 years of teaching. And we hear their concerns and we hear their worries. And so I think that what we wanted to do when we wrote our book was kind of just, it's, I guess, the equivalent of my grandmother grabbing me by the ear and kind of pull these organizations back to the table and say, hey, let's take a look at what you're doing here. This is not all about dollars and cents. There are a lot of effects in the ecosystem. There's a lot of ripples going on, and they need to be discussed. And it is not as simple as how do we make a PR agency run smoother, or how do we do PR for a firm that's trying to talk about social advocacy on one hand, but on the other hand, they're using all the water supply in a small town and people's electric bills have tripled. Those are problems that really deserve real conversations. And I hope the elected leaders and the folks sitting in boardrooms start having those conversations.
One interview I did that talks about this on a global scale, I interviewed somebody in the UK, works for a global insurance company, and she pointed to the fact that a company can have their carbon neutral targets, set for 2030, and making really good progress and being very open and transparent about it, and they're right on target. And then for perfectly legitimate reasons, they make an acquisition that makes business sense, but sets their carbon neutral target that back 5-6 years. So how do you explain that? And that's, again, where, we're talking profit first. And again, we're not anti-profit. I think what Heather and I are saying with this book is you can be both. And in fact, there's research out there that shows that companies who do both tend to be more profitable long term. So there is a dollar and cents to this. Improve reputation. It's been quantified in dollars and cents what reputation means. So I think, and so much of what we look at from the Western canon is the global North or the Far East. Well, nobody's really talking about the global South either, and that's a whole nother conversation around the issue. So, you could do a whole podcast just on that. So this really is a global issue. You hope, being the world's leading economy, that the U.S. will try and maybe take a lead in this, but I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Well, let me say this much. I mean, I had no idea that, the structure that we just talked about, the competition, if you will, between AI and the ESG and the CSR, I'm sorry. But, that's something I think that people are paying attention to. And obviously there is no clear-cut answer to what that is. The other thing is that when you mentioned global, at least I thank you for bringing this to my attention because, as you probably know, we reach into 160 countries, this podcast.
Right.
So somebody around the world is going to pay attention to it and, maybe take some action in some way, form, or fashion. So this is
and I don't want to paint, again, too broad a brush, Peter. There are organizations, companies who are doing this.
Mm-hmm.
There are some really good players in this field. It's just not enough.
Well, slowly but surely, sometimes people, to see what the actual benefits are or the downsides are of some things, takes a little longer than you would expect. But, sometimes this might be just one of those. And so this is something that, got past me, but I'm glad that you guys decided to bring it here. I certainly appreciate having an opportunity to get involved in it from this point of view and also to share it with other people around the world.
Well, it's our pleasure. I mean, we are on a campaign on this stuff. I mean, Heather and I are really, and I don't mean that in the public, I mean, yes, in a form of public relations campaign. Obviously, we're trying to get publicity for the book, but much deeper than that is we care deeply about this issue. And what we found when we started thinking about writing a book is who else is out there talking about this? And what we found is not really very many people.
Mm-hmm.
There are people who write books on ESG, and it's the E. Another book is on the S. Almost nobody's talking about the G part. But to use Heather's term, it's very siloed. And what we want to do with this book is it's almost a primer. And it's well, wait a minute, let's step back and look at this issue holistically, because it's a lot more than just environmental damage, which I'm not trying to diminish, but this issue is much bigger than that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, that's another angle that I think people need to fully understand, too. If they've got that sort of negative impact on the environment, that people need to hear about it. So that's another reason.
Heather, maybe we need to write two op-eds for the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, we do. I mean, or get our own Substack going. But the reality is just that these are going to be, we're not putting the genie back in the bottle, right?
Nope.
So AI is not going anywhere. So now we're in a situation of, since it's here and it does have a good business use case for a lot of organizations, how do we sort of manage it ethically?
Right.
And before it manages us.
Right. Or before it gets, how do we manage it ethically? And how do we align? I mean, there's a huge misalignment. And there's a big, big misalignment between what organizations say they value and how they're behaving in this space. So how do we help organizations? And here's the interesting thing about that. I don't think they realize how misaligned they are, because as I said earlier, the left hand doesn't talk to the right hand. The business, the chief technology officer and the growth officers or the people in F&A are not talking to the comms team and the PR and the CSR people. And so they're just kind of going about their own work without even connecting the dots. And so I don't think it's intentional. I don't think they're trying to hide anything from the public. I just don't think enough thought has been given to the problem.
Right. I don't think they're even aware there are dots to connect.
Correct.
Well, the other thing that came to mind when you were mentioning this is that, maybe you guys should be down at the Chamber of Commerce and talking to those folks, because these businesses are the one that have some say in how these things are going to be finally resolved.
Yeah. Well, we if you know anybody at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Peter, we'd love to.
Or the Business Roundtable, too, because the Business Roundtable puts out that report every year talking about their ESG accomplishments and their DEI accomplishments. And meanwhile, those same organizations, a lot of those are banks that are funding the AI growth. So it's kind of wild.
Yeah, they're talking out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. So.
Well, it seems like, you guys have this is a major issue that obviously needs far more exposure and at some very, very high levels. One thing, now that I think about it, because I did work in Congress for a number of years, that you might want to talk to your state senators also. Your senators from Pennsylvania, and maybe make a presentation to Congress on something like this, too. But I think
Yes.
this to me sounds like it's a topic that deserves more discussion and at very, very high level. So,
Yep.
uh,
We think so.
so let me say thank you so very, very much for bringing it to my attention. I am going to be quite pleased to put this up so that people locally, nationally, and internationally can hear about this. And you never know, because from time to time people do respond, not to me, but people who are on the show have called me to say that people have called them based on some of the things what they were talking about on this podcast. So if I can help you with this, please let me know. And well, I am, because I'm going to move forward on making sure that this goes, it will get on the air.
We're happy to have the ability to share it with your audience. So thank you for raising it and realizing what a concern it is and raising it to the attention of your audience.
So one of the purposes of this design when I put this podcast together is what would I want to get out of this podcast by putting this together if I were listening to one of them. That is something that I can use in my everyday work. Well, when I hear about this conflict of AI and ESG and so forth that people need to hear about. So you never can tell who's listening and what the responses might be. But it's also at the same time, this is a learning platform for people who will hear this. So let me say thank you again for you bringing this in. My guests today have been Dr. Heather Lamaris and Greg Fleisman, both professors at Temple University. And this has been very, very enlightening, and certainly my listeners are going to appreciate this show. So thank you so much for putting us on your list of people to contact. And let me say also to my listeners, I hope that you have gotten something out of this and that you'll do what you can to try to resolve this issue or contact Dr. Maris or Greg Fleisman and see about moving forward on this. The other thing I want to say is thank you so very much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast and share this with your friends. And we'll look for you for the next edition of the Public Relations Review podcast.
Thank you for joining us on the Public Relations Review podcast. We invite you to share this episode with your friends and colleagues, and we greatly appreciate your reviews and feedback, which help us improve and grow. The Public Relations Review podcast is produced by Peter Woolfolk in the Washington, D.C. suburb of Silver Spring, Maryland. Thank you for listening, and please share this podcast with your colleagues.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.